Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. Is the brand you represent united to provide the customer experience that your customers want and expect? Or are the individual teams in your organization working in siloed efforts for their own KPIs? How do you measure a customer's experience? From surveyed results or from your customers' feet marching to other brands? Jeanne Bliss is the founder and CEO of Customer Bliss, the co-founder of the Customer Experience Professionals Association, and she's pioneered the role of the Chief Customer Officer, having held that role of CCO several times at companies, including Lands' End, Microsoft, Coldwell Banker, and Allstate corporations. And on this episode, we'll discuss customer experience, the role of a chief customer officer, when and how leaders should take action to eliminate and unite the silos in their organization, how customer experience can affect sales and lead generation, how to view the tech pieces you implement, and how they should focus on the customer. So let's tune in to a customer experience pioneer with a marketing shark pioneer on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Jeanne, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would please tell us a little bit about your career to date and how you got to be the CEO of Customer Bliss.
Sure. I had this, first of all, I have to go all the way back, which is kind of silly, but my dad had a Buster Brown shoe store.
Yeah.
The man was like Geppetto. He was the guy who, when he retired, a line of people 3 blocks long stood to say goodbye to him. So
Yeah.
that was my role model from the very beginning. And I then fortunately answered an ad in the Chicago Tribune to go train 2,000 phone operators at a little company about 100 million in sales at the time called Lands' End. And that was like that was the experience that made my career. I started training all those phone operators on both service and product. And we were so small. I had direct access to Gary Comer, the founder, and as is my way, started peppering him with things about what we needed to do. We needed to do that. We needed to do this. We needed to do this. And after training them operators for about 2 years, he pulled me off the phone. He goes, okay, you smarty pants, basically. We are growing 20, 30, 40, 50% a year. You come and report to me and the executive committee, and you are the conscience of our company as we grow.
Wow.
You help us guide and move us. And as we're bringing all these new people who may or may not know our culture, you need to help us stay the course. And so that was essentially the very first version of a chief customer officer role that I had. I stayed at Lands' End for 10 years and then deliberately moved from industry to industry. And it was a very, very deliberate path for me. I went to Mazda Motor of America because they were wrapping a experience around the product, and that was something new for me. And it was a distributed experience model. I then went to Coldwell Banker Corporation because I wanted to have the field reporting to me. So I was the senior vice president of franchise services. I then knew I needed larger and financial services, so I went to Allstate. I was the first vice president of customer satisfaction and loyalty, reporting to the president of the personal lines company. And then my last gig corporately was at Microsoft. I knew I needed technology, so I was the first general manager of worldwide customer and partner loyalty. And after that, started writing books and supporting people because this role was unknown, unheard of, hard to navigate. And so in 2006, published the book I wish I had had on my desk at the time called Chief Customer Officer. I had to convince the publisher that people would buy the book and that we would sell more than 2 copies of it. And it was like being shot out of a cannon, and everything kind of rolled from there.
Sure. Well, it's amazing. I think we're both of the approach that customer experience is taking center stage today more so than ever. But would you agree with that, and why do you think that's true? I mean, people have complained about brands on a lot of channels for a long time, but they're doing a lot more now than they ever have before.
Well, there's several things that have occurred that are forcing functions that have made customer experience become something that leaders care about. Because in order for it to truly be something that is part of the organization, leaders, it does need to be leaders not only on their agenda, but it has to be something that they personally take action in.
Hmm.
Number one, we had an economic downturn, a really severe one, where companies were either living or dying based on the admiration of their current customer base. And so customer businesses and leaders recognized that organic growth and admirable growth from their current customers was what was going to keep them afloat, especially during an economic downturn. And so they started to recognize that they needed to build in the insurance that they were growing and earning this growth from their customer base. So that was number one. Number two is that social media kicked in, and companies could no longer say who they were or what they were, but because customers had the megaphone in their hand. And number three is companies were starting to attempt this very complicated work of uniting the silos. Leaders started to finally realize that, no matter how many memos that you write or mandates that you make that this is the year of the customer, the silos don't organically unite.
Agreed.
um, and again, this is all of this is in a very well intended way because of the key performance indicators that we establish or build. They're built to support silos in accomplishing specific things that may or may not be starting with the customer's goals, and all of those things have converged really to make customer experience important. But there's a challenge to that, which we can talk about in a minute.
Well, how then does a leader with an organization then at least get a true read of what the customer experience is out to the public? I mean, so many people live with NPS scores. That's
Hmm.
been sort of their bread and butter for a lot of years. But if you throw in that, you throw in social listening. If you talk about the reputation, the online reputation groups like, whether it be, Yelp or the star listings on a Google Map pack, that they pull up. If you think about all the things that form it, how does somebody get a true representation of what the public truly sees, at least to them, to where they can take an action upon that?
Oh, sure. Well, I wrote a book in 2015 called Chief Customer Officer 2.0, which was the rewrite of that very first book that came out in 2000, um, in 2009. And in it, I talk about a series of things that need to come together to tell the story of your customers' lives. And I'll walk you through them really briefly because what you just mentioned is important. We're in a very well intentioned way, grabbing data, content, etc. But we're presenting it separately, and then off the silos go to react. The social media feedback is presented, and off people go. People go into the field, and leaders go into the field and come back and say, "This is terrible," and off people go.
Hmm.
Instead, what really has to happen is, and again, very well intentioned. Instead, what has to happen is a balanced story of your customers' lives. For example, my first metric that I align leaders with and that we found changes companies is starting with, are you honoring and measuring customers as the asset of your business? What are the number of incoming customers, volume, and expected value? But then from that, you also need to do the math of the customers that you've lost in that same period, volume and value, to get a metric of your current customer asset growth or loss. Because at the end of the day, the reason you're in business is to grow that customer asset and enable your employees to deliver value to them. Lots of companies start with looking at surveys, but I believe we need to start by listening to customers voting with their feet. Did they stay and buy more or not? Full stop. So that's the first real true metric that we build with organizations.
Sure.
The second one then is aligning multiple sources of listening, but I'm a fan of aligning it by either customer goal or stage of the mission so that it becomes very, very relevant. Otherwise, what we have are dashboards that are by survey question that silo by silo chip away at. And now what we're doing is we're measuring success based on activity or actions taken, not necessarily customer lives improved. So align and bring together all that content that you just talked about, Kenneth. your social media, your trending of operational metrics, hopefully that are organized by what customers need, your 10 trending of complaints, your trending of verbatims, and then end it with your numeric, whether it's your effort score, your NPS, or whatever. But the story goes like this: as a result of the experience that we delivered to our customers in this last month or quarter or year before annual planning, did we, all of us, earn the right to grow? This is not a sales number. Let's look at onboarding. If you're B2B and stay in there's this stage, this is where the spiking of complaints and issues came from our customer forums. Let's look at our operational KPIs and see if we are truly delivering where customers say we're delivering. How much time did it take us to get somebody online or solving their problems? What is the spiking of complaints and trending? What do our verbatim say in this stage? Let me show you all the things the customer has to physically go through or emotionally, or the work effort that has to go into. And now, as the final of that, let me show you the numeric of what customers are grading us on this thing. What this does is it creates balance, it creates focus, and it establishes the ability to create prioritization. And those are the big three that get in the way of companies focusing on the few versus every silo focusing on the many things that make sense from them, but may or may not make sense to your customer.
So one of the things that, and I'm about to go speak at another conference focused on lead generation,
Mm-hmm.
there aren't enough people that are also thinking about this, at least in my opinion. There aren't enough speakers out there that are really talking about how this can affect sales and leads and things like that today. There are a very limited number of people who talk about, your experience and your reputation and translate it towards, how that will affect increasing sales. Are you starting to see that on your own change, or are you speaking about that more, hearing that from CEOs who are seeing that lead generation is declining because people see, negative comments on social or negative scores on Yelp or things like that?
Oh gosh, I've been talking about this for 10 years, and a lot of the people who are in this work, I mean, there are a lot of chief customer officers and other folks who have
Sure.
been focusing on this for many, many years. Um, there's a whole cadre of customer experience professionals focused on this. I think what it takes is making it so simple for leaders that it's translatable and becomes part of their leadership language. One of the things that we encourage is what I call brave and fearless sharing. Kick off every one of your meetings talking about this customer asset growth or loss. If you don't do that, you don't connect the dots for your organization on the work of the business. So it's really it also has to be the language of leaders, and it has to be the language of the united leadership team. One of the things that we spend an enormous amount of time on that a lot of people don't realize, or perhaps don't recognize the focus needs to be there, is on uniting the leadership team. Because again, in a very well intended and making sense kind of a way, each leader is focusing on performance indicators and metrics that are specific to their operating area. And without rolling it up, where leaders all have one common version of, if you will, the truth of the customer growth or loss, they're going to each tell the story of success from their operating area. And so a great deal of work needs to happen in, not only, to your point, making it be about more leads, when that really is a sales story, but really about the growth or loss of the total customer base as a result of the entire experience.
Yeah, agreed. So one of the points you brought up that I really liked was that, it doesn't happen organically, and there are a lot of things. The entire customer experience now is affecting sales, is affecting keeping those customers. But what kind of advice do you give organizations on how they make that pervasive throughout all the different departments and start connecting the departments? Because, especially for marketers, we isolate marketers, and they get a lot of we get a lot of fame and glory in driving a lot of this, but they can become just as siloed from the customer experience as anybody else in any other department, and that's unfortunate because those are the ones who should be as close to the customer as possible. All departments should be. But how do you start connecting those dots? What kind of advice do you give the CEOs and CCOs of the world?
Well, I mean, those are the people I coach, and in fact, if others want to hear about them, if I could mention that I do have a
Of
podcast
course.
show where we talk about this every week. We're on like show 180, and the most successful people do a number of things. Number one, they live the life of the customer, and that's not just saying everybody go do what the customer does.
Mm-hmm.
In a deliberate way, we break down and organize all the 20 things we require customers to do for onboarding or whatever, and then we start assigning those things to different parts of the organization to go have to do. The second thing is we're very, very specific, especially in the beginning of the journey of finding what I call the non-negotiables of the business. What will you always do, and what should you never do to grow your business? And we also then find symbolic early actions where we can say, "Oh my gosh, why are we doing this? Let's stop doing it." And here, everybody, is what we're going to do instead, because we need to, in early days, give people permission to emulate behavior that says this is about who we are as a company. The third thing that's really critical is uniting and enabling employees to voice where they see and where they feel and where they experience the arm wrestle, both for themselves and for customers. And so when we do those three things, especially early days, what happens is that the work becomes less conceptual and more about the life. It's very operationally relevant, and we get that passion. We need people feeling passionate by personally experiencing and understanding what's going on in the customer's life so they can advocate and charge forward with some things. And often it's just one action that starts this
Mm-hmm.
groundswell, but you have to find the action to start the groundswell.
Agreed. I wish there was the same, movement that we've seen with, customer transformation, if you will, as a name, like we've seen with digital transformation. There needs to continue to be this groundswell. When when you think about also in helping with digital transformation with people getting more closely aligned to their customers, are you running into instances where you're speaking with companies who seek your advice on what types of technology or tools or gadgets and widgets and wadgets that will help them connect as well? I mean, obviously, a lot of that's one to one. It's customer service phone calls and scripts and things like that. But there are pieces of technology out there that, CMOs in particular have to look at, or CCOs would have to look at implementing within the infrastructure of a company. Are you running into that type of advice much?
Oh, of course. Well, I mean, high tech and high touch need to blend. The
Agreed.
thing that we find that is critical, though, is start with your purpose and what you're trying to accomplish and what's your role in improving customers' lives, and then automate that, improve that, accelerate that, versus starting with the tools. I mean, where people
Oh,
are
couldn't
getting in
agree
trouble
more.
is, yeah, right. There's Michael,
It's bright,
Kenneth,
shiny object syndrome.
yes, there are so many tools, Kenneth, and it's and there's got to be a blend. Think about your own life. Yes, you can walk all the way through an airport without talking to a human, but it's that gate agent's empathy when she sees you dragging three kids behind you and takes care of you and recognizes that you need some help, that shows how he or she has been honored and trusted to do the right thing. And so the blend of high tech along with who we hire, how we hire, and how we proactively enable people to make decisions that are based on good judgment, it's everything. And a lot of companies are yielding to high tech, but forgetting that you have to be just as deliberate in the high touch part. And again, this isn't about saying, oh, it's the front line's job. The front line is going to behave and act based on what leaders enable them to do. And there must be deliberateness around that. That's when it starts to inform high tech in the most wonderful kind of a way.
So when you look at how, I mean, we know that customers, where they're going to penalize brands, they're going to write negative comments, or if they're, if they've got options, they're going to explore other options with other companies. For a company, how should they really look at, is that the right metrics they should look at how they're going to be penalized? And then on top of just staying with a company and being a long time value, lifetime value to a company, where you seeing that same amount of rewards, and what that's doing for companies when they improve that
Well,
experience?
I mean, I'm gonna talk about kind of what's important to me as I work with organizations
Sure.
is less about penalty and more about the kind of the North Star approach, which is how do you want to show up in the marketplace? What is your legacy? How do you want to elevate your behavior so that you build the kind of organization that your employees are proud to be a part of and your customers gravitate toward? They're fused to you because of how you choose to conduct yourself in business. That to me is um, what we're finding is the most prosperous way to grow. But it also takes an enormous amount of, again, what I call leadership bravery, and that's a rare world.
So, what are some of your favorite companies who are exhibiting outstanding customer experience today? And on the flip side, what are some of the worst?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to talk about the worst, but I just wrote a book.
Name
I just
names. Yeah.
and that,
No, I
well,
know.
here's the thing, Kenneth. People, I don't think that companies are deliberately going to work every day going, I'm going to make it hard on the customer to do
Absolutely.
business.
Couldn't agree more.
So I just published a book called Would You Do That to Your Mother? And in it are almost 100 companies that are exhibiting behaviors that I call that would make mom proud, but more importantly, they're admirable. For example, I love the example of Virgin Hotels. They chose to get rid of the fees for delivering your room service and your Wi-Fi. Raul Leal, the CEO of Virgin Hotels, considers Wi-Fi a right, not a revenue stream. So they got rid of what I call those captive costs. They also, for example, remove that fear when you crack open a bottle of water at 4 in the morning when you're so parched and you know you just spent $7 for 12 gulps of water by doing what they call street pricing, where they actually have their people go out with pads and note what a bottle or a can of Coke costs at the corner market or a packet of M&Ms or whatever it is. I love that story. Um, there's other great stories all throughout that book. I love Cleveland Clinic, who deliberately changed the title of every single one of their people from technician, receptionist to caregiver, again, to raise the water level, but then back that up with training, tools, and materials to support people so that they could be caregivers. Meaning that if you're delivering flowers and you see somebody's bed is rumpled, take the time and take care of them. Your hand's not going to get slapped for not, checking in on the number of times, number of flower deliveries that you had on your list. In fact, you're going to be heralded for doing the right thing. Alaska Airlines built a mobile app called a We Trust You Toolkit to enable all of their people to make a call in the moment to give exceptions based on what the customer was experiencing and what they were assessing was happening. Now, again, this isn't blind, do whatever you want. It starts with proactiveness and deliberateness. They proactively brought all their people together, understood all of the possible reasons why customers would have a fail, and then brainstormed the places where they would give people permission to act without asking for permission. And this is what changes companies. And that's an exactly perfect example of the blend of high tech and high touch. So those are just a few. And as I mentioned in this book, Would You Do That to Your Mother? There are over 100 companies and 32 deep case studies with actions that can be emulated to help any company start to take this action.
Well, if you look at your own career, I mean, obviously you've worked for some huge companies, Land's End, Mazda, Coldwell Banker, Allstate, Microsoft. I mean, these are
Hmm.
all huge names that people know, have heard of, have bought from, and you're seeing the same thing with all the customers that you provide consulting services for today.
Hmm.
Is this what's the central most important thing within a company that needs to to create this change? Is it the leadership at the top? Is it some sort of customer revolt? If you had to sort of wave your crystal ball, what's going to move this forward to improve experience dramatically over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's a great question, Kenneth. When I begin work with clients, one of the things I always want to know is what's the forcing function? Why now?
Exactly.
And what do you think you're trying to accomplish? Right? Why do you want this? And there's really two paths that we're hearing. I mean, there's more. There's nuances of these two, but one is the company that is doing this because this is really about leadership and how they want to grow. And perhaps they're seeing a looming marketplace shift and they want to get out ahead of it, right? We see a lot of this in the energy industry where natural and solar and other forms of energy giving customers choices that they didn't have before, and these companies are recognizing that they have to shift, but they're grounding it in we're going to shift to be the kind of company not that that builds these admirable acts. So it's about leadership focus, but really making sure that this is about how we want to show up in the marketplace. The other one is it's an ROI play. We want to do this to get more money. We've seen all the calculations and we realize that that's a lot harder path because every action and it can be done and it is being done. And I'm not saying the first path doesn't include growth. The first path actually gets you to growth faster because your decisions, the lens for decisions are more pure and more around the long term right decision making that will get you to the more robust and sustainable growth. The second path is the where's the money, where's the money, where's the money. You're going to inadvertently make some short term decisions that are going to impact long-term growth, and that's where when I work with these leaders they have a harder and more steep hill to climb. The second version of that of course is again it's ROI, but they've suffered to your point something in the marketplace, either a situation where their brand equity or reputation has gone down, or there's a disruption in the market that scared the heck out of them and they know they need to change.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the tipping point is, but I think at least for me, I've seen a lot of leaders who will say isolate, one or two or three things that they know they need to change within the organization, and maybe that doesn't change the other 10 or 20 things that they need to change to make it a better company overall. Or the customers start to revolt, and then that's what unfortunately it's not for a lot of organizations. It's too late, and then that's what's driving that shift. And it's always
Right.
with so many organizations. It goes back to leadership, but it's that tipping point. It seems like we're accelerating the pace of when customers would leave and join somebody else. Obviously, I mean they've got more options today. So if you if you had to think of your gold star company when you do this in your book, that your newest book, but you give the 100 examples, should a CEO look at one company in general, or should they isolate off bits and pieces? Because there are a lot of CEOs that I've heard speak before, and they'll say, we were trying to model ourselves after Acme Corporation, which has been a leader in this space for years. But that same company may have 20 other things wrong with them, and obviously any company is going to have some things wrong with them. But do you find it more pervasive in the mindset of a lot of these leaders to where they look at a company as a whole, or do they look at pieces in their organization that need to change, and they sort of represent them through other companies?
Well, great question. So here's what's interesting is the really the leaders who are recognizing that inside of their business they're essentially running 4 or 5 or 6 different businesses that require different competencies. Aren't Some people go off the deep end and say, "Oh, I want to be Zappos," and that's a whole other conversation.
Exactly.
But what we're doing is saying, look, if you're running a call center, here's the competencies. Where are the best ones here? If you're running a B2B company, let's look at people who do onboarding really well. But we need to look at practices that also line up with where you are in your maturity, your business model, your size, your marketplace position, because otherwise it's not apples to apples. And so that's really where a lot of our work comes in these days, is making sure that we're finding relevant practices that would not only scale but translate.
Jeanne, what's your favorite kind of shark and why?
My kids had a stuffed shark that I loved a lot because they used to bat me over the head with it.
That's perfect. So it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most important questions that you're going to be asked today?
I am.
Seattle Seahawks or Seattle Mariners?
Mariners.
Customer experience or customer service?
Experience with a nod to service, because there are compatriots doing the hard work.
Good point. Social listening or online reputation management?
You stumped me there because one's a brother and one's a sister, but we'll
That's a good point.
We'll keep them hooked together.
Public speaking at a lot of conferences, or authoring books?
One washes the hand of the other.
And the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
I don't eat carbs, but for my husband, I'd say both in quantity.
Good for you. So, Jeanne, where can people find out more about you, read your thought leadership, pick up your books, check out the podcasts, and learn more about Customer Bliss and you?
CustomerBliss.com, super, super simple. I married a guy named Bliss. People think it's a fake out name, but it's not. It's CustomerBliss.com, and everything is there. And people can reach me anytime. It's Jeanne, spelled the French way, Jeanne, at CustomerBliss.com.
And I just heard it, and I got you to snort.
Yes, you
I've
did.
seen you snort on stage. Seen you snort on stage.
I do snort on stage.
Yes.
I do. I can. I'm 100% Italian, and all the Italian women in my family snort.
Nice.
So that's my story.
Well, Jeanne, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Kenneth, thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
So there was my conversation with Jeanne Bliss, the founder and CEO of Customer Bliss, the co-founder of the Customer Experience Professionals Association, and she's pioneered the role of Chief Customer Officer, having held the role of CCO several times at companies including Land's End, Microsoft, Coldwell Banker, and Allstate corporations. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, when does it matter and when do business leaders take action? Isn't it this year or every year that it's the year of the customer? As she said, no matter how many memos that you write or mandates that you make, that this is the year of the customer. The silos don't organically unite. It's well intended, as she goes on, but as a result of this house, if you will, that we've built, with all the departments and their specific KPIs that are siloed and keep them from that focus on the customer and their experience, why should we be surprised? And with all the large sets of data that each department collects, whether it's social listening or online review sites or NPS scores or anything else, with each department's dashboards, are you really getting that holistic view of what customers think of you? She talks about creating balance, focus, and establishing the ability to create prioritization. And I quote, those are the big 3 that get in the way of companies focusing on the few versus every silo focusing on the many things that make sense to them, but may or may not make sense to the customer. I agree. Second, leaders need today to embrace that customer experience will affect your sales and lead generation. It's becoming less of a sales story and more of a CX story where potential customers see what current customers are experiencing. And so important is that current customers start marching their feet to other options in the marketplace. Customer experience is a major, in all caps, major differentiator for successful brands. Just look at all the brands out there that emulate this. If you want to charge more or keep more customers or have them be your advocates or have your business grow, then as she said, it has to be the language of leaders and the language of the united leadership team. In my mind, the entire company should have that one common version of the truth because it's the only one the customer will take the time to know. You've got to live the life of a customer and stop solely living through looking at the customer on a screen. Third, the technology you implement must be focused on the customer. To me, this must be a proactive and deliberate approach. I love all the emails I get, so keep them coming. Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It has been my honor to spend this time with you in order to discuss another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. So I hope today that your experience has been great. If it matters to you, then it matters to me. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.